By the late 1950s, physics labs and cosmic ray detectors had produced an overwhelming harvest of particles. Dozens of them, each with its own distinct mass, charge, and lifetime, sat scattered across notebooks with no organizing principle connecting any of them at all. It felt less like a science and more like a collection of unrelated curiosities. Some particles decayed almost instantly, others lingered strangely longer than expected, and nobody could clearly explain why this kept happening. Physicists needed something more than a list. They needed a pattern, a hidden logic that could explain why these particular particles existed, and not others entirely different. Chemistry had once faced a similar crisis before the periodic table finally brought order to the elements. Now, particle physics stood at that very same crossroads, buried under its own version of chaos. The stage was set for someone to look at this jumbled collection not as noise, but as a code waiting to be cracked, and one physicist was about to attempt exactly that feat. Murray Gell-Mann approached the mess quite differently. Instead of asking what each particle was made of, he asked how they related to one another. He plotted particles on a graph using two properties, electric charge along one axis and a newer property called strangeness along the other axis. Strangeness had already been introduced to explain why certain particles were produced quickly but decayed unusually slowly, behaving as though some hidden rule protected them. When Gell-Mann placed particles onto this grid according to their charge and strangeness values, something remarkable happened. They didn't scatter randomly across the page at all. Instead, they fell into clean, symmetric shapes such as hexagons with two particles sitting quietly at the very center. It looked less like raw data and more like a crystal structure or a periodic table waiting patiently to be recognized. If particles were arranging themselves into geometric patterns this precise, it strongly suggested a deeper mathematical symmetry was governing particle physics, one that nobody had noticed before this graph finally revealed it clearly. Gell-Mann named this organizing scheme the eightfold way, a playful nod to a set of Buddhist principles, chosen because the pattern often grouped particles neatly into families of 8 members each. The mathematics behind it came from a branch of abstract algebra called group theory, specifically a symmetry structure mathematicians call SU3, spoken aloud as SU3. This wasn't just decoration. The symmetry made concrete, testable predictions about how many particles of a given type should exist, and how they should relate in mass and charge. Physicists could take a known family of particles, plot them onto the eightfold way's geometric grid, and immediately see whether the pattern was complete or clearly missing a member somewhere. It transformed particle physics from a subject of memorization into something closer to solving a puzzle with definite rules. If the pattern was truly fundamental, it wouldn't just describe particles already discovered. It should also be able to reliably predict particles that hadn't been found yet, sitting quietly in an empty slot on the chart. In the early 1960s, Gell-Mann examined a family of 10 heavier particles called baryons, which were supposed to form a neat triangular pattern under the eightfold way. 9 of these particles were already known from earlier accelerator experiments, arranged perfectly across 9 positions inside the triangle. But one corner, the very tip of the triangle, remained completely empty and unexplained by anyone. Rather than treating this gap as a flaw in the theory, Gell-Mann treated it as a genuine prediction. He calculated, using the pattern's mathematics, exactly what properties this missing 10th particle should have, its approximate mass, its electric charge, and its strangeness value. He even gave it a name in advance, calling it the omega minus, because its strangeness value came out to -3, the most extreme value in the entire family. This was a bold move. Gell-Mann wasn't simply organizing known data. He was staking his reputation on the claim that an undiscovered particle, with very specific properties, was waiting somewhere out there to be found by experimentalists. In 1964, a team of physicists at Brookhaven National Laboratory took on the challenge of finding Gell-Mann's predicted particle. They used a large hydrogen bubble chamber, a device that let charged particles leave visible trails as they moved through liquid hydrogen, and bombarded it steadily with a beam of high-energy kaons. After sifting through tens of thousands of photographs of particle tracks, they finally found exactly what they were looking for, a single event showing a particle decaying in precisely the pattern Gell-Mann had described. Its mass, its charge, and its strangeness value all matched the prediction closely. The omega minus was real. This discovery did more than confirm one particle. It validated the entire eightfold way as a genuine law of nature, not just a convenient way of organizing a chart. If a pattern built purely from mathematics could predict an undiscovered particle with this level of precision, then something deeper had to be generating that pattern, some hidden structure inside the particles themselves that nobody had yet clearly identified. The success of the eightfold way raised an obvious question. Why did this particular mathematical symmetry work so remarkably well in every case? In 1964, Murray Gell-Mann and completely independently, physicist George Zweig arrived at the same radical answer. The patterns existed because the particles themselves weren't fundamental at all. They were built from smaller, more basic building blocks hiding underneath the surface. Gell-Mann called these building blocks quarks, borrowing the word from a nonsense line in James Joyce's novel Finnegan's Wake. Zweig called his version aces, though Gell-Mann's name eventually stuck permanently in the literature. The idea was audacious. Instead of dozens of seemingly unrelated particles, physicists could now imagine a much smaller set of truly elementary pieces, combined in different arrangements to produce every particle in the growing particle zoo. It was a return to the ancient dream of finding simplicity underneath apparent complexity, except this time the claim came with precise mathematics and specific, testable predictions about how these new building blocks should behave and combine together. The original quark model needed only 3 types, or flavors, to explain every particle known at the time: the up quark, the down quark, and the strange quark. Each flavor carried its own distinct mass and its own value of electric charge, and every known particle could be assembled by combining just these 3 ingredients in different arrangements. The up and down quarks were relatively light and made up ordinary matter, the protons and neutrons found inside every atom. The strange quark, meanwhile, was noticeably heavier, and its presence explained why certain particles carried that unusual property called strangeness discovered years earlier. 3 flavors alone might sound minimal, but the mathematics of the eightfold way had essentially demanded exactly this number to reproduce the observed patterns correctly and completely. It was an elegant simplification, dozens of seemingly distinct particles collapsing down into countless combinations of just 3 fundamental ingredients, similar to how a small handful of letters can be arranged to spell out an absolutely enormous number of different words. The strangest feature of quarks was their electric charge. Every particle physicists had ever measured directly carried a whole number multiple of the electron's charge. Quarks broke that long-standing rule entirely and completely. The up quark carries a charge of positive 2/3, written and spoken as +2/3 times E, where E represents the basic unit of electric charge. The down and strange quarks each carry a charge of -1/3, spoken as -1/3 times E. Nobody had ever directly detected a fractional charge like this sitting in isolation, and many physicists found the idea deeply uncomfortable at first. Gell-Mann himself treated quarks quite cautiously, describing them initially as convenient mathematical bookkeeping devices rather than claiming they were necessarily real, physical objects floating around inside particles. Yet the fractions weren't arbitrary at all. When combined correctly in groups, these fractional charges always added up to the familiar whole number charges already observed in nature, which was itself a strong hint that something genuinely real was quietly being described. With 3 quark flavors now in hand, physicists could finally explain the proton's internal structure directly and completely. A proton is built from 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, a combination physicists write compactly as UUD. To check whether this works, simply add the charges together: 2/3 plus 2/3 plus -1/3. Spoken aloud, that reads 2/3 plus 2/3 minus 1/3 equals 1. The 2 positive 2/3 terms combine to give 4/3, and subtracting 1/3 leaves exactly 1 whole unit of positive charge, matching the proton's well-known charge precisely and exactly. This result wasn't a coincidence engineered simply to fit the answer. The same 3 quark flavors, combined in different groupings, needed to correctly reproduce every other known particle's charge too. Getting the proton's charge to fall out so cleanly from simple fractional arithmetic was a powerful sign that quarks weren't just a convenient bookkeeping trick, but might instead be describing something physically real sitting quietly inside the proton itself. The neutron's composition worked out just as cleanly. A neutron is built from 1 up quark and 2 down quarks, written compactly as UDD. Adding the charges gives 2/3 plus -1/3 plus -1/3. Spoken aloud, that reads 2/3 minus 1/3 minus 1/3 equals 0. The single positive 2/3 is exactly cancelled out by the 2 -1/3 contributions, leaving a net charge of 0, precisely matching the neutron's well-known electrical neutrality. What made this especially satisfying was that swapping just 1 quark, changing a single down quark into an up quark, transformed a neutron directly into a proton. This matched something physicists already knew well from nuclear physics. Neutrons can decay into protons, releasing an electron and a neutrino in the process. Now there was finally a genuine physical explanation for that transformation happening at the quark level itself. 1 down quark quietly changing identity into an up quark, rather than some mysterious, unexplained rearrangement of an indivisible particle. Quarks weren't just useful for protons and neutrons. They explained the entire particle zoo through 2 remarkably simple counting rules. Particles built from exactly 3 quarks were called baryons, a category that includes protons, neutrons, and heavier relatives such as the omega- itself. Particles built from 1 quark paired with 1 antiquark were called mesons, lighter particles that had also puzzled physicists quite a bit earlier on. This simple counting scheme, 3 quarks for baryons, 1 quark plus 1 antiquark for mesons, suddenly organized the entire chaotic particle zoo into a tidy, comprehensible family tree. Every strange new particle discovered in accelerators could now be described as a specific combination of up, down, and strange quarks, along with their antimatter counterparts. Instead of having to memorize dozens of unrelated particles, physicists could simply learn the properties of 3 quark flavors and calculate the properties of any possible combination. The particle zoo hadn't disappeared, but it had been reduced to a manageable, comprehensible system built from remarkably few fundamental ingredients underneath. Despite its elegance, the quark model faced real skepticism through the mid-1960s. The most glaring problem was simple. Nobody had ever detected a free quark sitting alone, separated from its partners. If quarks were genuinely physical, physicists reasoned it should be possible to knock one loose in a powerful collision and observe its telltale fractional charge directly. Numerous experiments searched specifically for isolated fractional charges in cosmic rays, in ordinary matter, and in the debris produced by particle accelerators. Every single one of these searches came back completely empty-handed. This absence bothered many physicists deeply, including Gell-Mann himself, who continued describing quarks cautiously as a useful mathematical device rather than committing to their literal physical existence. Without direct evidence, the quark model remained an elegant but unproven hypothesis, admired for the patterns it explained but doubted by physicists who preferred concrete, direct observation over clever accounting. What the field needed was a completely different kind of experiment, one that could probe the proton's interior directly rather than search for a lonely quark. In the late 1960s, physicists at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, known as SLAC, built a machine capable of probing matter at a scale far smaller than anything attempted before. Rather than smashing particles together randomly, their approach was more surgical: accelerate electrons down a straight, 2-mile-long tunnel to extremely high energies, then fire them directly at a target of liquid hydrogen, essentially a tank full of protons. Electrons made ideal probes because they don't feel the strong nuclear force at all, only electromagnetism, so any scattering pattern observed would reveal something clean about the proton's electric charge distribution, undistorted by other competing forces. This experimental approach echoed a classic strategy from decades earlier: fire something small and fast at a target, then study how it bounces to infer what lies hidden within. But the energies involved this time were dramatically higher, giving these SLAC electrons the ability to probe distances thousands of times smaller than the proton itself, a resolution that nobody had ever previously reached inside a laboratory setting before. Before the experiment began, most physicists expected a rather unremarkable result. The prevailing assumption was that the proton's electric charge was smeared out smoothly across its entire volume, like a soft, fuzzy cloud of positive charge with no internal structure. Under that assumption, electrons fired at the proton should scatter gently, mostly passing through with only small deflections, since a diffuse cloud offers nothing hard or concentrated to bounce sharply off of. This model, essentially a pudding or soft cloud picture of the proton, matched what physicists already understood about how charge tends to spread across composite objects. If this expectation held true, the deep inelastic scattering experiment would simply confirm that protons were smooth, structureless spheres of charge, providing precise measurements but no dramatic surprises. Researchers at SLAC set up detectors positioned at both narrow and wide angles around the target, ready to measure exactly how the scattered electrons were distributed once the beam struck the liquid hydrogen, fully expecting a gentle, predictable pattern to emerge from their measurements. The actual results, gathered carefully between 1967 and 1969, defied every single expectation. A surprisingly large number of electrons bounced back at wide angles, far more than the smooth, soft cloud model of the proton could possibly explain. Wide-angle scattering like this only happens when a particle collides with something small, hard, and concentrated, not something diffuse and spread out evenly. It was the same basic logic used decades earlier to reveal that atoms contain a dense nucleus, except now applied at a dramatically smaller scale, deep inside the proton itself. The data strongly suggested that the proton wasn't a smooth blob of charge at all, but instead contained several small, point-like objects rattling around inside it, hard enough to deflect high-energy electrons sharply backward. Physicists had expected to confirm a structureless proton, and instead stumbled directly onto evidence of internal substructure. Whatever these point-like objects were, they behaved exactly like something real and solid, hiding just beyond the reach of anything physicists had ever directly seen before this remarkable moment. Physicist Richard Feynman offered a way to interpret this strange scattering data. He proposed treating the proton as a bag containing smaller point-like objects, which he cautiously named Protons, a deliberately neutral term that avoided committing to any particular theoretical model in advance. Feynman's Parton framework provided the mathematical tools to analyze exactly how the scattering angles and energies of electrons should depend on the properties of whatever was inside the proton. When theorists compared the SLAC data against Gell-Mann's quark model, the match was compelling. The number of point-like objects, their approximate charges, and the way they shared momentum inside the proton all lined up remarkably well with 3 quarks carrying the specific fractional charges the model had already predicted years earlier. Partons and quarks, two ideas developed through completely different routes, one from abstract symmetry patterns and one from smashing electrons into protons, were converging on the very same conclusion. The proton, long assumed to be an indivisible unit of matter, clearly contained smaller constituents hiding inside it after all. One puzzle remained. If quarks were real, why had nobody ever isolated one? The answer turned out to involve a completely new kind of force, unlike gravity or electromagnetism. Physicists discovered that quarks carry an additional property called color charge, coming in 3 types physicists simply labeled red, green, and blue, though this has nothing to do with actual visible color. The force between quarks is carried by particles called gluons, and remarkably, this force grows stronger the farther apart 2 quarks are pulled, unlike gravity or electromagnetism, which weaken with distance. Try to separate 2 quarks, and the energy required increases so rapidly that eventually it becomes more efficient for that energy to convert into a brand new quark-antiquark pair, rather than releasing a single free quark. Physicists named this permanent trapping mechanism confinement. Quarks are always found bound together in 2s or 3s, never alone, which is precisely why decades of searching for an isolated fractional charge in cosmic rays and accelerators had turned up nothing at all. Put it all together, and the picture of matter had transformed completely. What once seemed like a solid, indivisible proton turned out to be a dynamic system of 3 quarks, 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, bound permanently together by gluons carrying the strong force between them. The neutron told the same story with 1 up quark and 2 down quarks instead. Gell-Mann's abstract mathematical pattern, the eightfold way, had correctly predicted a missing particle years before deep inelastic scattering experiments at SLAC physically confirmed that protons contain real, point-like constituents inside them. 2 completely different lines of evidence, one theoretical and one experimental, had converged on the exact same answer. Protons and neutrons, the particles once thought to be the final, fundamental building blocks of matter, were themselves made of something smaller still. The search for the truly elementary hadn't ended with the proton. It had simply moved one layer deeper, into the strange, fractionally charged world of quarks, setting the stage for everything else discovered afterward in this ongoing story.